around all these different modes of LabLuv from Bauhaus, as you mentioned to us, to specific biological laboratories that we believe you will mention today. Welcome again, and we are looking forward. And so my first question comes. For the ones, actually, for the young generation, I think it's important to know this. In addition to your architectural identity, your works have at the same time an artisan approach besides the artistic aspect. How do you evaluate these two approaches when defining the path that you follow during all your careers until today?
Thank you very much for the introduction as well. It's I remember vividly the day I met you. It was very evident that the enthusiasm for experimental and research-based architecture had already been implemented in your heart, and it was a good moment that we met that time. It's supposedly to be mentioned that furthermore in time I worked in close affinity with Istanbul Technical University. I think the group of people who had been teaching at that time have also given a good platform. Don't you agree? I mean, I should answer your question rather than making this comment, but I kind of like now thought about that. Okay, back to our topic. Laboratory. I want to mention what a laboratory is before I go into detail to your question. A laboratory has so many different affiliations in our head. If it is linked to a hospital, it's an environment where you have measurements taken. If it is linked to a physician's office, then the sort of hardware or software you get to see there is different. It could also be a regional or a national referral center. It could be sociological. So this idea of the laboratory should bring into our heads, our minds, the scientific and or technological research, experiment and measurements, the performance area or the facility for this for these, and the fact that it's a somewhat controlled and specific environment. In our case, in the case of design environments, we can go back to the Bauhaus, where Gropius reminds us that the Bauhaus workshops were really laboratories for working out practical new designs for present-day articles and improving models for mass production. So he was pointing at this quality of these workshops, design workshops, where there was this focused intention on creating practical designs and a focus on the present day. So there's this research on what's up to date, what is the day's needs, and then a research on how to improve models. So today, maybe mass production is no longer the aim of a workshop. It could be. This can be the discussion in the questions. But back to basically your question is that during Bauhaus, especially in this time period where Deutsche Werkbund was established. So we have to remind ourselves, what is Deutsche Werkbund? It is the German Association of Craftsmen. So this association is bringing together artists, architects, designers, and industrialists. This was established in 1907, and it's majorly worked the understanding of what we want to bring in together from the artisan. How do we want to implement in terms of the architect? How do we want to think about the artist? It's actually melding in and then redesigning, redefining the borders of these professional descriptions. Actually, it's when industrial design was happening or becoming as part of a design discipline. So we may want to think about in that time when each student had to complete a full-term apprenticeship in a local trade. So they had to either understand how to do the metal or they had to understand how to work with wood. They were not only actually artists and artisans, but also an engineer, a sociologist, and a designer. So for me, it's not, so answering your question, for me, it's not about being the artist, being the artisan. It's more about, as Nassim Taleb puts it, to have your skin in the game. And also I have to remind that although Gropius was talking about the new architecture, new architect, for me, it's not only about finding the new, but more so about the immersion of oneself and the team into the material and the process and into the concepts of the contemporary. So it's the immersion that I am interested when I am talking about laboratory conditions, and when I'm talking about whether it's an artistic attitude, whether it's an artisanal attitude, whether it's an architected attitude, but it is more about really getting yourself into the game. So interestingly enough, as I said, there's this transcending the realms of the fragmented roles, which was actually what modernity was about. But while doing that, I know you like blurring the boundaries, but while doing that, redefining and expanding these borders within each domain.
Yes. Maybe at this point we may also ask, how did living and working in London affected your approach towards design? In other way, what are the differences you feel compared to Turkey, especially in the development of creative ideas? Like, does it matter where you are located in that sense?
Thank you. This is, I'm pretty sure you know very well, this AADRL environment. Yes, it has affected me immensely, but I have to admit, like, the design studies in London meant for me the ability to work between domains, being able to map and strategize between domains and as well as between scales. So what does this mean? This means being able to conceptualize, like when you're thinking about the gate as an opening for a series of actions, or like a nozzle, a spout for the flow of a certain granular meter jetty, or a gateway that connects multiple computers, how you kind of like map in terms of patterns these similarities as well as differences in your mental map or like in your drawings, basically. So I think what was especially important and interesting for me is being able to practice this in terms of being able to map the physical and the analog in correspondence with each other, as well as map between domains. But I should also admit it was a very similar mentality in Mimar Sinan, where diagram as a tool for design dialogue was like immensely important, as well as this iteration and assessment. And that was what was really effective in London as well. So this continuous remapping of the information. And if you come to think about the digital, it is true that when I went there, I learned 8 different computer programs. But it is also true that it was 1993 that I first had my PC and designed my final project in the computer with the help of my friend Alper Nemli. I should name him now. He was the geek friend who helped me with the 3D modeling. So it is true that I was introduced to the digital realm when I was in Mimar Sinan, and I had quite a lot of diagrammatic thinking and iterative design into the design practice already. But London meant being able to transcend and be able to connect different domains much more rigorously. And of course, 3D and physical modeling that happened in enormous variations. On the other hand, physical modeling did not exist at all at that time in my education. It was very sad because we had to leave the school at 6, for example. Not much of a technological or technique-based physical modeling at that time, which was really the thing that I had my hands on in London. I think this is, as I can summarize as the difference and similarities between the two.
Interesting to hear that comparison. Thank you very much. And from this point, maybe I will take you in a different way, to a different subject in a way. A famous childhood writer says, the world can be looked at human height, but also from a cloud. In a way, you look at your own designs and production approach at the scale of a person, and you look at it from the cloud with the childish excitement. When you produce them at Urban Atelier, you design products that we can sometimes perceive as if we are looking from the sky, sometimes monumental, and sometimes include urban production practices. And when it comes to my question, actually, how do you plan the reflection process of this interscale and multidimensional transition in your design and production universe?
I think I can answer such a question. Okay. Urban Atelier has multiple facets of operation. Like together we designed, you designed an object and we implemented it tried out various versions and implemented in physical, into the physical, like for example, let's say the mellifluous lamp, mellifluous candle. So that is a different mode of work, similar in the sense that it is working with materials and techniques. But in my personal challenge of space and topology, I think the same applies as I was just saying how London affected, or how in Mimar Sinan it was important for me, the diagrammatic design and iterative design is the process that I am taking. To be able to describe this, personally, I am very much interested in how space or topology forms as a process, for example, by pressure, or for other natural processes, as a difference between pressures, as a difference between temperatures, for example. And this idea, this challenge, or this interest appears in various, I don't want to say products, works, art, craft, design, space, whatever you may want to call them, in various scales and manifestations throughout my practice, let's say. Like in this case, IV in 2009 is actually analog study between the pressures of different blown bubbles balloons inside another balloon. But the idea was how I can make the balloon stay intact and in space, not go above, as in this case, concrete was filling in their gaps. And once you take the balloons off, the concrete element becomes the structural space holder of the, let's say, chambers or the alveoles around it. So this was 2009 when I first tried, conceptualized how I can actually bring about this spatial construct that is holding space in this non-orthogonal, like rhizomatic position. In 2013, there was the digital version of this with its life cycle, let's say, the coded version of how I can actually perform the same attributes in a coded environment, not basically mimicking, but actually kind of like getting its own generative story. And in 2017, iBiosis, on the other hand, has similarities, but differences. At some point in time, I had tried to make this life size, like 3-meter diameter version, and doing it in the same way I did the analog failed. It was too heavy, too bulky, and had too many failures. But in 2017, doing it hollow inside and only on the surface, like a shell production, served. So it's a continuous research feeding in from other works, to be frank, throughout the process. But yes, it is about the diagrammatic mapping between versions. So this iterative process, feeding and feeding out. I think that's the answer.
It's quite interesting also to follow it in such a timeline and to see from analog to digital, and from there a manufactured version, but much lighter, like lightweight structure.
Yes.
And in a way, also volumetrically, it's changing the definition, so it becomes more structural in more
Exactly.
at the same time. I think it's like being in between scales and also following a process, like an agenda, and it keeps going and going and evolving and creating its own iterations in years, and turning really from small scale really into in a way like inhabitable space versions you are doing. I think these are quite interesting also from my side to follow your research agenda in that sense.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you very much for this explanation. I think it's very important for everyone to witness it in that sense. And at this point, can you also explain a little bit about like this design process? In a way, like we know that you are closer to analog techniques and digital techniques, but also there are homogeneous approaches. So in a way, you answered this question while you are mentioning about this process. But do you have any priorities? Maybe I may ask that sense.
Okay, the iBiosis I showed in the previous page is actually digitally born in a sense. I mean, it's feeding in from previous studies, but it is in terms of form finding and realization, to be able to realize it, we are digitally, it's Orkut Beta prepared the basic code for this, in this case, Voronoi application. But the idea of pressure in the first one becomes the idea of the suspension and the pressure of the fabric that we are spraying the concrete. We worked on this with fibrobeton, and we have a patent being followed on the production process. But whether it is born analog and replicated, reproduced, or born digital, I think it really doesn't really matter that much. I mean, when it is analog, it means it is there's a computation going on with the natural, with the nature. Nature is computing the outcome. And if you think of the digital experiments, they are algorithms, and you kind of like go through the same tests in time. They're, I think, both time consuming if you think of it. I mean, we always think the computers are saving us time. I'm not so much sure. But the computer is really allowing us to do multiple tests much more rigorously with more data, more shareable data, and be able to control the pathways and continue the iterations simultaneously, if you know what I mean. I know you know what I mean. It's like in the analog, you have to leave, and doing multiple tests is a bit cumbersome. I mean, you waste a lot of energy and material mostly. But in the digital, you can keep various the variations and continue their life cycle as design iterations and be able to compare them. But okay, that was a deviation for what I had in mind to say, is that these works, for example, they fed into what became Albiosys, and they were like back in 2010 working on a Gaudian-like space-making studies with with the students of Yıldız Technical University in our studio. Yağmur and Dilek worked on this multiple Gaudian surfaces. So again, the fabric and the medium of the composite. And at that time, how the workshop was looking so much different than today. But it was important because when all the students had their hands on the material and produced these outcomes, they could see each other while working on it, how space was forming, how the material was changing, how the process was evolving from day to day. And that also was very much I don't want to say teaching, but a learning experience is a better word. And going back to the DRL experience, I think that was interesting for me as well, to be able to see all these sort of different space-making practices coming into life. And below on the right-hand side is where we did a physical graph, if I can say. It was the noise levels on the topology, augmented with the topography, sorry, so that we could see the effect. Like if there were trees, the noise effect would diminish. If there were there was a difference in height, the noise level was increasing. So we wanted to see that diagram physically. So this was a physical diagram study that Afshin had done at that time. What I'm trying to say is, like almost 7 years ago, the studies that we did on something else fed into what became the Albiosys experiment and design for us. I think this is important.
So we may say that you develop a system of rethinking by re-examining your architectural approach within lab culture, not once, but again and again and again. So this helps also to really develop constantly and evolve it constantly. But in this timeline, what do you do to refresh your inspiration while developing this rethinking system at Urban Authority?
Yes,
it doesn't matter only Urban Authority, but still important.
Yeah, the keywords you had given previously, yes, rethinking the process is I think one of the major motivations. I find myself redoing everything we are doing again and again. What if I do it like this? What if I do it like this? And I think that's the laboratory mindset that is affecting. But I think it is also pointing at a mental lab. So, okay, when like these were not the inspiration per se, but models more so that we took when we were doing the IBOSIS, but not as a starter or like how do you say, an inspiration from that we designed from, but perhaps we knew it in, I mean, who is we? Perhaps I had in my mind the structure of the bone or the way the rhizomatic formations of the mushrooms, etc. So this was already residing in the mental laboratory. So observing these and questioning how, why, like in this case, why the thicknesses are varying, why the diameter of the bone is varying, etc. That sort of questions allows for a process-based thinking, basically. So you have these cognitive models that are applied and reapplied to causes and effects. So then, during your work on these spatial formations, however you are kind of like interested in having them happen in whichever scale, you start applying, as I was saying, the domain mapping into them. So instead of calling these mimetic designs, like mimesis being the not replicating but mimicking, trying to be as such. And Gropius is talking about this in this new architect book. I read it very recently. He's talking about how you can do the prototypes in the workshop, but when you are doing it in larger scales or for the industry, I was going to say, I forgot to say that today a lab can work on the prototypical situations or make the installations of, say, 14 meter by 14 meter at house, but it cannot really do large scale, say, office buildings or like bridges. A laboratory in terms of its size, like a workshop. How do you translate it into a manufacturing workshop, let's say? How do you translate that or transform that into a basically production area? That's a question mark. But going back to the question and what I wanted to say with these images is that instead of mimicking, it's this reapplying certain principles and the thinking of cause and effect into the process design. So we're not only designing the form, but we are actually designing the performance through that form afterwards, the ones that are going to happen afterwards, and we are designing the process that allows for that form and performance to take place. I mean, today I am more and more interested in how this process is actually the product by stages itself. So it's kind of like, instead of a finished final product, you have actually stages where it is evolving and then you're inserting new elements into it and it's evolving. That would be interesting. So maybe if I answer it correctly, my inspiration is then working like an inspector and taking the variables as the protagonists and then putting myself in each one's place and seeing how the others are when I am in that place. Maybe that explains.
extremely interesting, and it explains really much more than I expected. And I also like the way how you describe this cause and effect relationship, and the way how your excitement also remains not only designing the form or doing these mimesis, but also the way you say it, like designing the process and designing the performance and taking the stages, actually the main the design points, so they can always keep evolving. So there is not only one, let's say, the only and one result. There are like many of them according to stage you focus on. I think this is extremely inspirational by itself. So that's why you become the investigator that I can understand very well. First, like it works, yeah, mutually it works from that point of view. And at this point, recognizing that the most sustainable option is to reuse existing resources, you challenge the desire to build new in some of your works. And you insist on having an open and spirited dialogue when choosing materials in your productions. And your sensitivity to the reuse of material is very inspiring for the future. Can you explain in that matter your approach to use these experimental materials, and what are they? Maybe some examples you know.
Yes. Going into materials, yes, of course, I already talked about this lightness. Okay, since 2006, when we started working on the fibrous structures workshops, and then the exhibition with Claudia Pasquero and Marco Poletti, it was concrete as this what used to be a bulky element becoming a malleable element, what used to be this massiveness turning into lightness, that then throughout the design of the albioses, I was pretty sure by then that it needed and it wanted to be a skin rather than the mass. And even if it wanted to be the mass, the thicknesses needed to be varying between certain performances throughout a given surface or a structure. So in this case, yes, in terms of material, although concrete sounds very off for the sustainable or the environmental ear, it is also organic and very, from the territory. And when you look at carbon footprints, instead of using, for example, say marble, you may want to get yourself back to concrete. But these are questionable. I can also talk about, like in this case, previously we were talking about digital and analog. Here in this case, you see one of the very initial prototypes we did in the workshop on albioses. So albioses was about these tubularity, different levels of porosity, basically. So you can make a hole with it. You have the hole that is, it is all tubular, and then you can have smash holes on its surface. So these different, actually, 3 levels of porosity is actually what it provides a performance as the lightness. But the other thing, because it was empty inside, it was tubular, and we wanted to really give a focus on that. We used mycelium as a filler with sawdust, and wanted to see the life cycle, like for example, in various areas of the structure it would come about, and various areas it wouldn't. So very, very micro level climatic conditions would happen on the surface. This was, we were interested in seeing, because in such shell structures, I mean, from Çamlıca Kulesi project of yours, we know very well that different areas of surfaces, you get different effects, and that affects the structural performance in time as well. So not only thinking when it is actualized, but also when during its life cycle, it's going to be affected by its own environmental conditions. So through this experiment, then we were invited by Arup on doing this research on bio-based materials, especially, again, mycelium. So it was interesting, especially in the mycelium situation, but also in other studies. When you are pouring concrete, for example, you start to understand more and more that the modus operandi in a laboratory condition is awareness of the conditions. So it's what are the conditions, what's happening around. So you start to see the changes in temperature, the effects of changes in temperature, changes in pressure or pH levels. So you are able to compose processes with these effects in mind. Okay, if there was an engineer here, most probably, if there are any, they would say, but of course. But as we are architects and we are not so much well aware of this 4 degrees of change creating really a scar on the concrete that easily, or in the scales that we are working in the buildings, maybe we are not that much interested in the minute differences, but in the laboratory conditions, you really see the effects with your eyes. I think that is what is laboratory love is about, being able to experience it firsthand. And to think about the fact that the laboratory gives you a systems-based thinking, which is the eco-based design, basically. So having natural systems in operation has been a very interesting addition to my way of viewing the world, I should say. Has been a challenge. I mean, landscape urbanistic designers already have these motives in mind. It has been new to me, if I may say, but it provides the logic for creating synthesis between life cycles or behaviors of material. Yeah, I think that's what I can say on the new materials. I think
it's really, I think it's extremely important, actually, what you are pointing out also with these examples, because, I mean, as you say, like, you are using still as one of the main elements concrete, but instead of running away from concrete, you are giving it into it also a different ways of implementing, like different symbiosis relationships to become more sustainable. Yes. I think it's extremely important. Like, we should just delete it and say it's bad and it has a lot of the carbon footprint. It's the easiest way to choose and to run away, but you are, instead of that, you are really running towards it and taking it and changing really all the understandings or all the judgments about it in a different way. And so I think for future environment that we will live in, it will be really important to think about this kind of approaches, the way you are also trying to push forward. I find it extremely important for anyone who is really interested for these subjects. They should go into more details and research your work in that sense. So while you are producing at your practice, you can sometimes cooperate with other ateliers. Also, such as much as we know, as an example, melting plus is one of them. Like, we use as a different material, like, or I mean, as a collaboration or cooperation. Can you talk about how this creates collaborative opportunities for your practices? And can we maybe open our minds a bit more about this subject?
I have these two images from the workshop, very dull and, you know, on the spur taken. We were cleaning, I suppose. And I just wanted to say it becomes a conglomeration of experiences and collaborations. It is in his texts, Alan Turan talks about the modern person, modern man and woman, as these subjects of doing, performing, making. So my note here was that although lab environment is, I find, deeply intimate and personal, it is so much connected and reliant on others, like the raw material that you're getting. Even if you grew the raw material, for example, you grow your mycelium product at your place, but then you buy the mycelium, you buy the substrate, or you have to get your casting done at some place. So a laboratory focuses on procurement. If you think about different ways of labbing, there's always this connection to other service providers, quote unquote. I think the only way you can find yourself isolated would be, to answer your question, when you are in an island. Even in that case, you are being fed or connected to whatever there is on the island, like a tree maybe is growing or a bamboo, and you find yourself coalescing with that, actually collaborating. That reminds me of the bird fishermen in Yangtze River. I was lucky enough to be there, and I experienced one of the, you know, fishing sessions, and after that they gave me the birds, one of the birds on my lap. It depends on your level of understanding, most probably, or your choice of commenting on such an event, but I felt collaboration between the two creatures. Some people find it evil to have animals serve such kind of activities, but they were both feeding out of the same activity. It depends on who thinks how. It's a big question, maybe not the question of this moment, but again, it's a kind of like an economy or a feeding, feed out between different characters of the network. I think laboratory environment is such. And I think friendliness is key. This is something I learned along the way as well. It's not like you order something and because you pay for it, you have to get the best. It's more like being able to understand what the conditions they are, making that come through with, and what are the conditions. Since I am producing in the laboratory as well, I understand the fact that it's always needs a lot of compassion and understanding. But this environment cannot be without the exchange of knowledge, experience, and goods and services, among other elements of the society, basically, of the community.
It's really so good.
Maybe I can also, yeah, collaboration is key. These are two examples. One is from this year, the other one from last year, where we collaborated with, I mean, it's like this. Both Kerem and Saranoa came to the workshop asking if we could design and collaborate for their artistic work backup. So how can we make it into an installation? What materials can we use it? In the case of Saranoa, how can we pour it? She did the whole thing herself, but we gave design production collaboration to her for her installation. So this collaboration, co-designing, coexisting, and exchange, as I was just saying, this was the basic image. I should be talking about this, but anyway, yeah, I think it is key, and yeah, it's core.
Okay, so maybe we know that you are also tired. It's at the end of the week, Friday evening, and you really spared your time for us, and we are really thankful. And at this point, before closing our talk, I would like to ask my last question. Are you excited for the future? And
Yes.
what is your next step? Can you share with us the secret?
Yeah, this is what I really hope for Urban Atölye. I mean, production design, especially in installations, but hopefully in building level as well, is pretty special and exciting for Urban Atölye. I couldn't mention here in this presentation, but we have something called Space Chase, that is a digital plugin for at the moment Rhino Grasshopper. This was a TÜBİTAK project we finalized. We are now in the second phase, which is exciting us. Maybe in the next time we meet, I hope. This was more focused on Urban Atölye in the physical realm, but that will be more a new Urban Atölye section. Maybe we will see. Yeah, I am. I wish we could enlarge the lab. I don't know. Maybe have some sort of learning experience inside the lab. But as a next step, this is something that Gianfrancesco had worked on through Albiosis. How can we turn it into a sort of pavilion size and a space? He improved the code to turn it into a masked operation, so you didn't have to have the box situation of the Voronoi. Instead, you could have any form as you like, and it was improved so that you could have various sections where you didn't have to have the Voronoi connections for the network. So my aspiration in this case for the future is being able to realize this. And at the point of Arup, we had made a network diagram of who's working on what in terms of the mycelium materials. And yeah, I really wish Urban Atölye can thrive and continue to work in different material and process designs in a larger network in the future as well.
We wish you all the best during this researches and developments you will face in the next coming years. And we are excited also to follow them and learn from you and from your researches. And we are also looking forward to see hopefully soon this digital.
Yes, we should do that.
Maybe another session. So it's
good. Let's do that, please.
It's on the table. This was only session 1. Hopefully, when you feel it's ready, we can also talk about this digital.
Would love to.
That you are developing. And it's interesting to know like where and how you would like to use them, for what reasons. Like I have so many questions already in my mind. Okay,
we should.
For the next one.
We should.
Thank you very much, Nilüfer.
Thank you.
For your time, and we appreciate a lot, and we are looking